the Boston terrorist attack. Well, let me start with this. People were sending me tweets asking me if I thought at the time that this was the long predicted on this show 9/12 incident. Because I've said many times that, the next time 2 buildings fall down or something of comparable magnitude, I really think the worst is going to happen. I mean, I just can't see us doing as much in terms of anti-terror changes as we did after 9/11, 2001, going from where we already are. It's one thing to go from the society of the year 1999 and move towards where we are today. It's another thing to move from where we are today, that same distance forward in the world of anti-terrorism. And I think it's obvious, but I don't think that the incident at the Boston Marathon is the 9/12 incident, which I said at the time in the Twitter feed, because, well, frankly, it's not big enough. I mean, when we talk about 2 buildings falling down, you need something that traumatizes the country for, a year. I think we were, don't you think, Ben, like post-traumatic stress, national post-traumatic stress for a good year after 9/11. That's the kind of thing that's going to happen again. The problem, of course, is that if you're a betting person, you have to bet that something like that is going to happen again, which is why the whole 9/12 thing is so depressing, because any expert you talk to says that these kinds of things are going to happen because as a society, as a free society, an open society, wouldn't really matter even if you weren't that open. Societies that aren't that open get hit with terrorism. But as an open society, we are such a target-rich environment that it's not something... I mean, can you imagine... I always try to put myself in the other shoes. Can you imagine trying to support the position... Were you ever in debate class, Ben? Speech and debate? They used to... The favorite thing that they would do is say, okay, here's this important controversial issue. How do you feel about it? And you get up there and passionately say how you felt, that position B was the right position. And then the debate teacher would say, okay, you get to defend position A. Can you imagine turning around and saying, I'm going to defend the proposition that there's not going to be any more large terror attacks on U.S. soil? I think that's ludicrous. Even if we weren't such a target-rich environment, but we are. Every expert I've heard says that, we're vulnerable, it's going to happen, it's an odds game, right? So I think what worries you is watching how we reacted to, and this is not, please, I hope the people, who know people who were involved and experienced anything from that terrible terror attack in Boston, don't take this the wrong way, but what happened there is minor in the world of terrorism, especially in the world of the kind of terrorist scenarios that you see some of our security experts worrying about. These people are worrying about nuclear bombs being smuggled into harbors. They're worried about threats that are going to kill 250,000 people. Big things. Or disease smuggled into the country. You get some of these, bacteriological or viral agents that are produced, are weaponized and are produced to, literally infect 4 or 5 people with and then have them walk around spreading this stuff. There's really nothing scarier than that. We did a history show a long time ago called Bubonic Nukes. And at the end, I tried to sort of leave a little hint, I guess you could say. I think it was the sound of a glass beaker breaking in a laboratory. That, we seem to think we are in a post-apocalyptic plague era. And yet we're one good, weaponized, germ being released into the public sphere from having it happen again. And nobody living today has any idea what that would be like. That's the real danger of terrorism. I'm ashamed to say, but 3 people dying and 180 people wounded in the Boston Marathon, believe it or not, is one of those moments where the top security experts wipe their brow and say to themselves, oh my gosh, thank goodness, that could have been so much worse. Could have been so much worse at the Boston Marathon. In reality, when you think about it, again, this is going to sound crass. I don't mean it this way, but to only have 3 people die in that with the kind of crowds they had in that area? You think about a standard hand grenade going off in the middle of one of those clusters of people, and you should expect more than 3 people to die. So in a very weird way, as bad as this was, and, as much as we reacted to this as though, oh my gosh, it's like 9/11 all over again, this was a minor terror attack. Go talk to people who live in countries that have major terror attacks all the time. My goodness, look at the bombings that go on in Iraq every week. You get, 75 people dead and 300 wounded. I mean, imagine if that's what happened at the Boston Marathon. And unfortunately, as I said, if you look at the security experts' writings and you read what they're saying and you use a little common sense, folks, this is going to happen. This is the scary part of terrorism. It's inevitable. It's in our future. The question is how are we going to react to it? And is it even possible? I mean, this is almost like a history show topic. Is it even possible to expect us in the heat of the moment to react rationally? And I think we've talked about this before many times, haven't we? This idea that intelligent people sitting down and debating this point and trying to create workarounds and defense mechanisms in our system, speed bumps, roadblocks, anything like that, would sit down today and say, okay, how can we prevent ourselves from going, ape crazy the next time, 2 buildings fall down? And we've said many times, the best way to do that is to craft legislation now. Do what they always talk about doing, and they do in some places, with firearms. You have a waiting period. Can't write any legislation other than anything that might close an obvious loophole that the terrorists expose. Can't write any legislation that's going to change our way of life till we've had a little time to settle down. You can't write the Patriot Act 2 and 3 and 4 in the heat of the moment. We're temporarily insane. Thou shalt not legislate while temporarily insane. I mean, this is the way an intelligent society, not that there has ever been one, sits down and tries to confront inevitable scenarios that have the potential to change your way of life in ways that no one wants, right? Nobody wants to turn into a police state, a security state. But that's where we're heading. And it's almost because of the qualities that make us human that it's inevitable. I mean, you literally have to legislate to prevent us from doing what we're hardwired to do. Let me explain the dynamic, and I don't think you need me to explain it. Every time we have, well, first of all, start with this proposition and understand this. We're not repealing anything, okay? Any anti-terror legislation that we already have isn't going anywhere, all right? So any new legislation is going to be built on top of that. It's creating a foundation, a legislative foundation. There is not going to be, in our lifetimes anyway, an opportunity when people can turn around who have to face elections and voters and everything else and say, you know what, we're well defended enough. I feel comfortable dialing back our anti-terror laws. The anti-terror laws we keep adding all the time are, for all intents and purposes, at least in the next century, permanent. So, when you have another terror attack, even, sorry, Boston folks, I hope you can just insert sorry, Boston folks, every time I say this, but even a relatively minor one like the Boston Marathon, you have a natural reaction on the part of our politicians. Our system encourages it. The carrots and sticks encourage it, almost mandate it. They say, how can we prevent another attack like this? What can we do? We have to do something. That's the problem with the scenario. We have to do something. There's no way any legislator worth their salt can sit back and say, well, I think we've done enough damage to the Constitution. This is a threat to our way of life. I think we just have to sit back and accept this as the new normal. Nobody can say that. And if you did say it, you would be eviscerated by the opponent that you run in the next election with. Can you believe Senator Jones said that we have enough anti-terror laws? He's preventing us from doing a better job of defending your children. I mean, there's just no way in a Democratic, or Republican-oriented system where you can get away with doing nothing after a terror attack. But anything you do is going to be piled on all of the things we've already done. In other words, the anti-terror legislation begins to stack up. And then there's going to be another terror attack. So what are we going to do then? Now, here's the thing, folks. And again, this is where you have to be intelligent about this, I think, in a way that, again, we're not hardwired to do. You can't stop terrorism. What's the old line they used to say on the Dan Patrick used to say it on ESPN? You can't stop terrorism. You can only hope to contain it. You can't stop every attack. You can only hope to stop more attacks. So this dynamic isn't going to end because the attacks aren't going to end. When is enough enough? When have you decided that you've gone as far as you can go, shutting down society, turning it into, a surveillance state when the attacks keep coming? Is there ever going to be a time that the legislators are going to go, we've done all we can do. We can't ratchet down, the pressure anymore in the society without doing grave damage to it. Lindsey Graham, ladies and gentlemen, wanted to treat this guy that they caught, the one terror suspect that they caught, the younger Chechen guy, and wanted to treat him like an enemy combatant on American soil. He's an American citizen. Ladies and gentlemen, we have gotten rid of those lines in the sand, those firewalls that are supposed to protect us from arbitrary government authority. And once you take them away, stepping over those smaller firewalls and those little lines afterwards becomes all that much easier. And the excuse for doing so are these terror attacks, which aren't going to end. Now, does that make Lindsey Graham somebody who wants to live in a new version of Nazi Germany? No. He's a legislator who feels compelled to do something. That terrible phrase, it's a little like the news media, isn't it? People who want to reform the way the news media works have often said, you ought to have, and I've said this myself, you ought to have a newscast. Doesn't really work for CNN, does it? You ought to have a newscast that's only as long as there is news to fill it with. You shouldn't feel compelled to continually make news or beat the same story into the ground over and over again. You shouldn't feel compelled, if you're a legislator, to always do something, but the system sort of mandates that you do. When Lindsey Graham says, well, he ought to be treated like an enemy combatant, and he's just doing what the system encourages him to do. And if the person he's going to run against in the next election had a different opinion about it, Lindsey Graham's going to shoot him down using the fact that my opponent didn't want to do anything after the Boston Marathon to keep Americans safer. He's pro-terrorist, or not anti-terrorist enough. And again, I sometimes question the intelligence of our species when I hear all these things. And other authors and bloggers and everything have written about this many times, and we've talked about it many times, but this whole inability to grasp the most simple of points in the whole debate we're having here when it concerns how you treat these suspects, and that's that they're suspects. When you talk about treating this Chechen who survived gun battles with police and everything, when you talk about treating him like a military, asset seized on the field of battle, you're making an assumption of his guilt. When we talk about treating these people, as though they're guilty before they've had a chance to prove that they are guilty, this is where your problem comes in. And you can read people's responses sometimes in that comment section under online news stories where people will say, he's a terrorist, get over it, or he's a terrorist, he doesn't deserve, the protections of this or that amendment, without noticing that he's not a terrorist until the law proves he's a terrorist. If you want to talk about how we treat convicted terrorists, that's one thing. If you want to talk about treating people who haven't been convicted of anything yet, who haven't had anything proven yet, who are suspected, ladies and gentlemen, we are all potentially suspected of terrorism until we're not. And terrorism itself is going to metamorphosize into all kinds of things that aren't terrorism at all.